So one of the things I really wanted to dig in with you, well, there's two things, but one is around ESG. I know you lead that for Cadera, and you and I had a great conversation about it. As I see ESG, it's a buzzword still. And if I'm a leader, I'm either really happy about it, maybe embracing it, or I'm scared to death, right? Or I still am not even quite sure what it is supposed to mean to me in my organization. Okay, I'll have other people take care of it, the things that we must do. So you have a real strong position on, what it really can mean from an organizational standpoint as well as an individual. So me as an individual, call me a consumer in this world, a participant, someone who lives here on this earth that we've been given as a gift. And so I feel that I really wanted you to share some of, what ESG really means, and then how companies can really look at it. And particularly, we're going to get a little bit into, I think, the S space. I'd love for you to share some of those stories.
Mhm. Yeah, so we're not too late to the game on ESG. I first heard the acronym when I was helping a client with a 5-year corporate strategy. It was a global publicly traded company. And the executive team said, we're going to have to build ESG into the strategy. And I said, what is that? And they said, we are going to have to figure that out. No one seems to know. This was several years ago. And then I've just sort of like I kept this piece of paper where I just doodled and doodled, like, where do I think it's going? How does it fit together? Because, I think strategically, I want everything to fit on the
Yeah.
piece of paper and fit together. And so, the rest of the world's a little bit ahead of the US, but I can break it down for you. ESG. G stands for governance. And just think, this is about your shareholders. Is your business going to be a going concern? Do you have you know, good board governance? Do you have transparency? What about cybersecurity, data security, all the things that a shareholder would care about? The S is you just kind of widen the aperture a little bit. Like, what about the people that our organization interacts with, whether it's our employees, workers' rights, workers in our supply chain, do they have access to clean water, things like that. But it's also about the communities in which we live. So that includes DE&I fits into S
Mm.
very squarely. It's one of the early things we saw here in S. And then social impact. So the philanthropy program that I stood up and run at Credera, that's in the S, right? And then E is the one that seems to be getting all the attention and confusion. That's environmental sustainability. And it's really 5 aspects to that. One is, greenhouse gases. That's, global warming. Everybody's, knows about that one, but it's also about water use. It's about waste and pollution, biodiversity and things like that. So every business, depending on your model, has different aspects of E that you're impacting or you can have a more positive impact on.
Thank you for that. I think you broke it down in a very easy way to understand and consume because it can seem really daunting. So let's put myself in the position of a leader right now, and then I want to put myself in the position of a person, me. And so, as a leader of an organization, let's say it's got a global footprint, where do they even start to think about this and put it? And okay, how do they really think about it? You can argue a lot of companies are. And let's talk about this being a US company, since we talked about Europe might be a little bit more forward in this space. How do I start to prioritize and think about what I would need to put in place just to start?
That's the exact question that caused me to stand up the ESG practice here, is helping, just like you would with any strategy, break it down. Where do we start? Right. So if you don't have good governance in place, but we probably ought to start there. um, in environmental sustainability, that's the one that's getting more attention, and the reason that U.S. companies are going to have to start paying closer attention. One, the SEC passed a new policy. It's being argued right now, so it's on hold, but it will probably go through, in which all publicly traded companies are going to have to report their emissions, and they're going to have to
Oh,
be auditable, just like your financials are reported and auditable. Right? And so that
Wow.
creates a data problem, if you will. Like, how do we do this in a way that you can't do this on spreadsheets anymore? I think I read over 50% of Fortune 500 are still using spreadsheets to track their emissions, right? So that's not, how do you defend that when you're in an audit situation? So that's the other part of the ESG practice, because Credera does data and technology and transformation, all of that. You can think about the, probably 40, 50 systems inside of a large company that have the bits of data that need to be pulled together and run through the, emission vectors and do the calculations and put into the reports, so you report to the reporting bodies. So it's really just a big data project. But then you still break it down, right? I've got a client right now, I think they have 36 data sources. We're not going to get all that in the first year. So like, where can they just kind of continue with how they have been, and where can we start to, piece by piece in an agile way, start to automate, bring things into a data lake, and start to build out what they're going to need. The other interesting part is, like, even if you're not publicly traded and this SEC ruling won't affect you, your ability to sell your products and services are going to be impacted. And that's the part that's the most interesting to me, is if you do business now with a major global company, you're probably being asked about your commitment, about your measurements, because as a vendor to someone, you are part of their scope 3 emissions. So if your
Oh,
emissions are going
wow.
up, theirs are going up. If yours are going down, theirs are going down. And so it matters now. And so one of the projects we did, when we implemented some emission tracking software, basically, you can start to rack and stack. You could see the vendors, like, I'll pick on airlines, and you could see how much of that company's emissions were due to airline X versus airline Y. And then you can imagine what the next step might be, which is, well, let's have a policy that we don't fly airline Y, and that will immediately
Wow.
reduce our emissions. Well, you don't want to be airline Y, right? But it's like this, if then thing that starts happening. And I'm totally making this up to have a simple example, but let's say the airline says, our number, we all know it's fuel. First of all, we all know, well, fuel is the number one emission.
Right.
Well, let's pretend it's catering. And they're like, well,
Okay.
hold on. Hold on, I'm going to switch caterers and bring my emissions down, right? Now, the caterer is like, wait a minute, it's the baker that I'm using. I'm going to switch bakeries. And the baker's like, wait a minute, it's the milk that I'm using. I'm going to switch dairies. And here we go. And so some, dairy in Iowa all of a sudden is impacted because a Fortune 100 was trying to reduce their emissions by switching airlines. So, I mean, it's
Wow.
interconnected. That's what's really interesting to me.
Hey, it's Michelle. Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoy our podcast and know someone who you believe would make a great guest, I would love to hear from you. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and let's talk. I'd love to hear your feedback, and as always, may it inspire you in your own personal and professional journey of life.